So today we're in section 8.5, slope-intercept form. All right, the first thing you need to know is what is slope-intercept form. So we have it written right here on the board. You've already written it down. It's y equals mx plus b. That's the algebra form of it. And we have to know what each part of the formula means. So my x and my y, that's my ordered pair. All right, so the x and the y that we see here, that's my ordered pair. What did I say the m stands for, guys? M stands for my slope. B stands for my y-intercept. And you see that up in the wording too, that the slope is m and the y-intercept is b. So in an equation, it looks like this. Y equals 2x plus 3. The 2 that you see in red, that's your slope. What is slope? Slope is the angle of the line. So if my slope was 2, I know that any whole number is over what? Over what? 1. So if my slope was 2 over 1, that means that I would rise 2 and run 1 between the points. So for every point, say I have a point on the graph, I would go up 2 over 1, plot another point. Up 2 over 1 and plot another point. The slope tells me basically how many units I'm moving between the points. And then the 3, the blue 3, that's my starting point. We'll talk more about that in just a second when we graph them. All right, any questions on what each variable in the equation means? Everybody got that? So what does M stand for? What does B stand for? Y-intercept. Very good. Okay, so in example 1, and I need you to write this down, okay? Again, you're going to highlight this, you're going to underline it. Before you solve, make sure it's in slope-intercept form. Before you solve, make sure it's in slope-intercept form first. The equation must be in slope-intercept form first before you can find the slope or the y-intercept. So that's going to be the first question you ask yourself before you solve anything. Is this in slope-intercept? If the answer is no, you got to put it in slope-intercept. If the answer is yes, then you can identify whatever it's asking you to solve for. Right, so let's look at the first equation. Y equals x minus 4. Is that in that format? Is y by itself equals the x term and then the number? Yes, it is. So that is in slope-intercept form. Say, well, it's a minus sign instead of a plus sign. That's okay. As long as the y is by itself, and then the x comes right after the equal sign, and then the number, it's in the correct format. Does that make sense? All right, so because it's already in slope-intercept, that's really easy. Now all I have to do is identify what the slope is. Remember, the slope is the number connected to x. Well, I don't see a number there. Is there a number connected to x?
1.
It's 1. It's understood 1. So anytime there's a blank, there's no number, I know that it's an understood 1. Then for my b value is the number that's by itself at the end of the equation. Again, when it's in slope-intercept form, there's going to be a number by itself if there's a y-intercept. If there's no number, it means that it's 0. Okay? So b equals negative 4. All right, what about the second equation? 3x plus 5y equals 10. What's the first question I'm supposed to ask myself? Is it? Nope. So you have to put it. Go ahead and put 3x plus 5y equals 10 in slope-intercept form. You have to do that first before you can say what the slope and y-intercept are. Okay, so 3x plus 5y equals 10. So what I'm going to do is I need to solve for y. So I need to move what's not connected to the term first. So how would I move 3x to the other side? How do I do that? Subtract it. Subtract 3x to the other side. And then 5y equals, what term comes first in slope-intercept? Negative 3x. You've got to watch that sign. Negative 3x plus 10. And now I need to solve for y. So how could I get y by itself? Right now it's connected to a 5. Divide everything by 5, because if you divide this one by 5, which you need to do to get y by itself, that means you have to divide everything else by 5. And so now you have y equals negative 3 over 5 x plus 2. And you did that so that you would have it in y equals mx plus b form. It is. Y is by itself, then my x term, then my number by itself. So now I'm ready to identify what is my slope and what is my y-intercept, my b value. Don't say it out loud. Go ahead and write it on your paper. All right, so what's m going to be? Negative 3 over 5. And then what's b going to be? 2. And that's all they're asking you to do is just say what is m and what is b. All right, any questions on that one? Okay, now this one's just really important that we get the slope-intercept form, so we are going to go ahead and do the third one. 3y equals 4x plus 12. Again, your goal is to get y by itself equals the x term and then your number. So go ahead and write that one in slope-intercept form and then tell me what is your m and what is your b. I'm going to go to a new screen so I have some room to work. All right, so 3y equals 4x plus 12. All right, what's messing people up is the x is already on the correct side, so I don't have to do anything with this side. It's already in the right order. Now I just have to divide by 3, 3, 3 to get y by itself, 4/3 x plus 4. All right, so we did that, so now we can identify what is my slope. What's my slope? My number connected to x. What's my slope? 4/3. 4 over 3. And we have to keep it a mixed number because if we change it to an improper or a mixed, we have to keep it improper because if we change it to a mixed number, it's not going to be slope anymore. So 4/3 and then b is what? 4. All right, any questions? Who got that right? Who got that right? Raise your hand if you got it right. Or you're getting better. You're starting to get it. If we were to do another one, maybe you'd get it all the way. Okay, so b equals 4. Now in example 2, we're going to graph it. All right, so in example 2, what's the first thing we check for when we look at the equation? Is it in slope-intercept form? Is it? Is it in slope-intercept? Yeah, it is. Okay. The y is by itself, then the x, then the number. So we're good. Now, graphing an equation, here's what I want you to understand. We've been doing this all chapter 8. You guys remember your tables? Okay, ignore the graph for now. You guys remember setting up your x, y tables? What numbers would I put in my table if I wanted to graph this equation? Would I do my standard domain set? No, why? Because there's a fraction, so I would have done my custom domain set. I could have done my x and y intercepts. Remember when we wrote the equation twice and we substituted 0 for the one we're not solving? Okay? But instead of doing all that work, I actually can just go off of the numbers in the equation as long as it's in slope-intercept form to graph it. I don't have to do any work. I don't have to do a table. I don't have to figure out x and y intercepts or any of that. This number right here tells me what I need to know. A positive form, okay? So I need you to sketch a graph on your papers. It needs to be a little bigger than the one I have here. I need you to go up 4 and over 4 in each direction and down 4. So 4 on each side. Go ahead and just sketch it on your notes. Your classwork needs to be on graph paper. But on your notes, we're just going to sketch it on the paper. All right, so we're going out 4 in each direction. It doesn't have to be a huge graph, but don't make it teeny tiny either. Okay, so everybody have your graphs sketched out. So now what we do to graph an equation using slope, so we're not using tables, not using intercepts, we're using slope. We read the equation and we start with our y-intercept. Whatever number that is, that's where we plot our point. Since it's a +4 or a +4, we're going to plot our point on a value of 4, a y value of 4. That's our y-intercept. That's where the line crosses the y-axis. Then from that point, and guys, hear me on this because every year I have someone make this mistake. You start at this point. You don't start at the 0, but from this point, you're going to count your slope now. -2/3. You need to remember the negative means the rise. If it's negative, it means this top number right here, you're actually going to go down from that point. If it's positive, you're going to go up from that point. So since it's a -2, you go down 2. So down from a 4. What am I doing? Here we go. Down from a 4, you're going to go down 1, 2. And then how many is the run? 3. 1, 2, 3. And this is where you plot your second point. Okay, you don't have to do those squigglies. I was just kind of trying to show you how you count. All right, and then you draw your line through those points with your arrows on the ends, and you've graphed your line. So you started the y-intercept, whatever that last number is, you plot that point, and then you follow the slope for your second point, draw your line, and you're done. All right, so now we're going to skip example 3. Okay, we'll come back to some practice if we have time. We're going to skip example 3, and now we're going to talk about parallel and perpendicular lines. Parallel and perpendicular lines. Okay, what you need to know about parallel lines, and I'm just going to draw 2 quick sketches. It would be helpful if you did the same on your papers. The first one is going to be a parallel line. All right, so let's say we had, just 2 rough graphs. 1, 2. All right, and here's my lines. Got a line here. A line here. And I have a line here. And here. Okay, so I have these lines. Get the rest of my arrows drawn. What do you notice about the first set of lines? What do you notice about them? Do you think that they're parallel or perpendicular? What do you think? Parallel or they're parallel. Remember, parallel lines never cross. So here's what you need to know about the slopes of parallel lines. The slope on a parallel line is the same. It's the same. So you need to write slope is the same. What does that mean? That means if the slope on the first line is 2/3, the slope on the second line is 2/3. Their slope has to be exactly the same in order for them to never cross. They have to have, so if on one line I'm rising 2 and running 3, on the other line I have to do the same thing. Rise 2, run 3, rise 2, run 3. All right? For the perpendicular lines, the slope is the negative reciprocal. Guys, remember that word reciprocal? What's a reciprocal? Anybody remember? What does reciprocal mean? So let's say 3/4. What would be the reciprocal of 3/4? 4/3. Okay? So the negative reciprocal means the opposite sign. All right? So if the slope on, let's say, line 1 is 3/4, the slope on line 2 would be 4/3, and then it's the opposite sign. Does that make sense? All right, so what if the slope on the first one was -2/3? What would the slope on the second one be? if it was perpendicular? What would the slope on the second one be? Emily? 3 over 2, and would it be positive or negative? Exactly, because it's going to be the opposite sign. So if the first one is negative, I flip it, and then the second one's going to be positive. You see that? Guys, you see that? Just nod. Just nod. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's parallel and perpendicular lines. So now let's look at the problem. All right, it's going to give you an equation. 4x plus 3y equals negative 18. Go ahead and write that down. 4x plus 3y equals negative 18. Go ahead and write that down. Is it in slope-intercept form? All right, so answer is no. You need to write it in slope-intercept form. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to walk around and check and make sure everybody's writing in slope-intercept form. Okay, so what do I have to do first to get it in slope-intercept form? What do I do first? I subtract 4x, the entire term, to the other side. Now, what am I left with on the left? 3y equals, what do I write first? Negative 4x minus 18. Now what do I do to get y by itself? Divide, yes, everything by 3. And guys, your signs are so important. So if you have your sign messed up, that's going to mess up the sign of your y-intercept, and you're going to graph it on the total wrong side. Okay? So y equals negative 4/3 x minus 6. All right? So that's one line. I could graph that, couldn't I? Couldn't I graph that? Can y'all visualize that with me? Where would it be? Where would my point go on the y-axis? Where would my point go if I were to graph it? Where does it go? Negative 6, right? Point goes on negative 6. And then from negative 6, so picture it with me, where do I go from negative 6? Would I go up 4 or down 4? Down 4 and then over how many? 3, and then I would plot my point. So can you picture that line on your graph? So now imagine if you were to have another line parallel to that. What would the slope be of your parallel line based on our rules? What would my slope be for the parallel line? If it's going to be parallel, it can never cross. Parallel slopes are always the same. So whatever your slope is in this equation, your parallel slope has to be the exact same. What did we say about perpendicular? Yes. So go ahead and try to write down what your perpendicular slope would be. If you were to do another line, but now it needs to be perpendicular, what would your slope need to be? All right. Y'all have it written down? Write it down. What'd you write? Okay, so since the parallel was negative, the perpendicular has to be the opposite sign, positive, and then you flip it, 3/4. All right? So once you get the equation, wouldn't it be nice if they gave you all your equations in slope-intercept already? Wouldn't that be so nice? But they don't. And your mean teacher who writes your quizzes and tests, I don't either. So you have to know how to do it. All right? But once you have it in slope-intercept, it's just a matter of you've got to just remember, oh, well, parallel slopes are the same. Perpendicular is the negative reciprocal. All right, and if you understand that, that's everything you need to know for section 8.5.